Hey, welcome to Inside Town Hall with Jeff Bragman. I am the guest host today, Michael Clark. Jeff, thanks for having me on as your guest host today.
Oh, I'm always happy to have you on. Somehow we have fun.
Well, we've only known each other, 25 years maybe?
Long
perhaps?
time since the kids were little.
Yeah, that's right. Very little. All grown up now, but hey, there's a lot going on inside Town Hall. And this is your show to talk about, what's happening. But what I'd like to set the tone with is, you came out with an ad. We're filming this on the day that your ad came out in the East Hampton Star.
Yes.
An independent voice for supervisor. And I thought that maybe we could hit on a couple of the points that are on
Sure,
there.
let's do that.
Because, you're reading these things. Sometimes you like an explanation, right?
They can always use more talk. That's what I like about this show, is that we have a chance to just conversationally discuss stuff. Sometimes the town board has got that, formal structure, and it's much more, I think, informative if we can just talk casually. The ad is, intended to continue with a theme that I like to talk about, which is, that it's necessary to lead by listening. Because I do think the first step in making decisions is engaging with the public. I learned that in a long career of environmental work, a lot of it contentious environmental work, and I learned to trust the knowledge, local knowledge that people have, and their opinions about their own neighborhoods. And it carried over into town board, because I could see pretty readily that the better job we do at listening to the public, the better our decision-making process is. We're just better informed and have a better idea of what direction is supported by the community and what direction might not be supported. And some of the comments in the ad are of instances where the board didn't start out, listening to the community, and others are wound up better when they finally did.
So give us an example of that. So this first one, for example, the cell tower. Right?
The cell tower is a hot issue.
Very hot.
And it's been so for like 2 months. And this is an example of a decision that was sort of pre-baked. And there was, I can't talk about what was said behind closed doors, but there were a number of closed doors discussions. And then at a certain point, it was previewed in a town work session. Those are the sessions that are designed to permit discussion, but frankly, that discussion it's a done deal. And there was a lot of paperwork supporting that it was a done deal, no environmental impact. So the first meeting really presented it in that light. And
what would the process be, though? Say if you were handling the whole thing, what do you feel that the right process would be?
Well, typically, you would, especially if you're considering a cell tower, even under our local law, right. Typically you're supposed to have alternatives. So what you would expect, if you were really doing the kind of deliberative process that would get you to something that the community would support, you'd want a couple of alternative locations. And I think what you'd want to do is before, it's always dangerous to lock into a position before the community has had a chance to review it and comment on it and think it over, frankly. And I think it's dangerous because that our law is structured so that it's designed to bring in public input, because they understand that we do better, we get more knowledge, we get different perspectives. And, local neighbors know a lot about where they live, and it shapes projects. I mean, everybody that brings a project up thinks it's a great idea. We always do at the beginning. But, you have to test it, with the public, and the public helps you shape it. And we get to a better place. That didn't happen here. Instead, it was presented like this is where we're going to build the tower. And as it happened, for those folks that don't know, it was in a 7-acre woodland preserve, which was the centerpiece of a surrounding residential neighborhood. It's a modest neighborhood, hardworking neighborhood. It's about 30% Latino. And they predict, and I said the first time that it was presented, we have to notify the neighbors. And we got into a very formal argument about, well, what's required under law? But I wasn't really talking about the law. I just said, as a matter of practicality, if not fair play or legal requirements, we got to alert them to what's going on. It's a 185-foot tower. They've got to hear about it. So I think that was the mistake coming out of the starting gate, and that could have been done differently.
And where is it at now?
What happened is the neighbors became very organized very quickly, and they did what, a concerned group should do. They started attending board meetings. They started commenting in the public comment section. They reached out to other neighbors. Eventually, they submitted petitions with 650 signatures saying it was an inappropriate location. And it's interesting because my opponent actually in the beginning said that this location had to be the location. It was fixed because another more optimal location at the Girl Scout camp, which is nearby, this is all nearby Fort Pond, wouldn't agree to a tower that was tall enough. So that was the motivation for using this piece of property. And as it turned out, it really didn't require me to do much more than make a telephone call. I called up the Girl Scout camp before the next work session meeting, and was surprised that the manager said, "We don't know what all this talk is that we're holding you up on the tower. We support you on the tower. We'll do whatever we need to do to help you get the tower of the height that you need." Okay. So that's one thing that public input brought out, because they were questioning, why aren't you going for the location at the Girl Scout camp, and they had heard that the Girl Scout camp was available. And the Girl Scout camp had leased the property out to a tower company that we were negotiating with. So that when that came out, it really, I think, unveiled the fact that there wasn't a strong reason to put it in the center of a neighborhood, especially in a woodland. And in fact, our laws on the books regarding cell phone siting, they label woodlands and open spaces as spaces that are not recommended for towers. And so what happened is the discussion evolved in a much more detailed way after that. And it's really largely thanks to the efforts of the neighbors and the neighborhood and the extended neighborhood that they brought in, the 600 people, that the town board was really forced to reconsider. And when we made the public the fact that the Girl Scouts were cooperative, American Tower was cooperative, it has seemingly changed the direction entirely.
So, and along the same lines, you've gone on record as saying that the Springs Dog Park, for example, is another thing that is happening now, very hot issue for a little while. And your feeling is this is another example of not listening or not engaging the public.
Yes, it's kind of, I call it ready, fire, aim.
Right.
There was a plan floated, and I'm one of the users of the dog park, and there are probably 300 users of the dog park. And if you've been in it, it's one of the prettiest parks in East Hampton. It's not only used for dogs. It's not really a dog park alone. There are people that hike, and the trails are pretty well maintained so that you can do like a mile circuit. It's a very kind of mild hiking place, and you can see birds, and the vegetation is beautiful. It's beautiful all year round. I'm there in February, I'm there in June, August, really beautiful. And there was a plan floated, and it's, they started trying to say there were safety issues in the park, and it was a little waffly about what the safety issues were. A deer had gotten in, and then they were complaining about invasive vegetation. But there was even an early recommendation to remove the fencing around the perimeter, which would have changed the entire purpose of the park. And again, it got elevated to the top of the agenda of the Springs Citizens Advisory Committee. So all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there was all this talk. And immediately, as soon as the word got out to the public, there were 67 emails that went out to the Spring CAC, committee saying don't do anything. And they had a meeting that was attended, and I think about 90 people were on the call. But, and I think this is significant, the members of the public were muted on the call. They were not allowed to talk. So there was no give and take. There may have been some messaging that the councilwoman who was, the liaison was privy to, but there was no record created. And, from what I learned afterwards, it was largely negative comments from people saying we don't want any changes to the park. And, frankly, as a user, I stood up right away. My first comment when I heard it was that this park does not need to be changed. There is one thing that could be added to the park that I think would be an amenity.
What's that?
And that is that a number of people with smaller dogs, little portable pocket dogs, felt more comfortable. Sorry, but I'm used to slightly bigger dogs. Now I have one very big dog who's 80 pounds. Never had an animal that big, but she's a doll. And they wanted their own space. And it's clear that you can create a small dog area conveniently right next to the parking lot. We have acreage there. And you don't have to mess around with the configuration of the park, which works beautifully and people support. So I do support that.
So tell me how this, not knowing how these, like you guys on the board aren't sitting around waiting to say, hey, let's do the dog park, right? Does someone initiate that originally and then you guys move on it? Or like,
it can be a little of both. I mean, certainly as elected officials, we can have ideas. There's no question that that's,
Sure.
I say lead by listening. I don't say listen, listen, listen. I go like listen and lead. So we can have ideas. But what I've found just out of experience is that really the first step, the very first step,
Okay.
is opening the doors and windows and letting the public know what's going on so that you get feedback, because you might get support and say you're on the right track, or you might get criticism or suggestions that would change it and make it a better plan. So I think no matter where the idea comes from, it's got to be exposed and transparent to the public, the portion of the public that are the users. And in the dog park case, I'm not sure who it was that floated the idea originally. I do know that the very beginning of it contained a suggestion to get rid of the fences around the dog park, which had me as a user very upset because I really like the dog park. And it's one of the few places that you can let your dog run. It's even better than the beaches because you don't have to worry about other people. So. And eventually what happened is, I believe, is they've abandoned the idea because it just got such a strong blowback. And again, it probably, should have been anticipated. I mean, it's not that difficult to know that there's a loyal group of people that don't want that park changed. And I'm among them. I freely say that. So those are two instances where ideas started and then they take on a life of their own, and only when it finally gets really known, like there's an article in the Star, and then people jump on it, they erupt. Right. So I mean, the goal here is to try to avoid intense controversy if you can.
So let me see if I have this right. So, I mean, everybody can have an idea, or somebody comes to the town board, or members of the town board, or wherever it comes from, and boom, the light bulb goes off. And so the next step in your mind, what you're saying is that the next step really should be you throwing it out there to the public and saying, this is what we're thinking. What are we missing? What do you think?
I think that's the best way. I mean, it's a very common sense suggestion. I mean, I can give you another suggestion I remember from way back in the beginning, when I was first on the board, when a councilman came up with the idea of paving the parking lots in Montauk. And I was looking at it and said, okay, it's a parking lot, no big deal, So
You wouldn't think. Yeah.
So it rolled along, not much public input on it, but one day, literally, I was walking into town hall and a couple of surfer guys called me over and they were pointing to the map and they said that they were bothered because the paving got too close to the wetlands. And it happened to be the Ditch Plains lot, which is the dirt lot. And I looked at them and I said, well, do you want that lot paved? And they looked at me like I had shot them. They were so surprised I would ask. And they all said, no, we don't want it paved because it's that iconic lot. And I said, well, come on in, I'll support you on that. I don't want it paved either. And that got a little contentious. But the ultimate result was, and I said this publicly, my opponent actually turned to me and said, are you saying you made a mistake when you said there were no environmental impacts? And I think he thought I would melt if I, with that comment. And I just said, yes, I think I made a mistake and I think we should do it over. I don't want to pave it. Well, you know what? They came around. They came around unanimously and we didn't pave the lot. And I found that is what happens often, even in these contentious discussions that people tend to get over-focused on, like, oh, they're arguing over stuff. And I have other examples in the ad, and I want people to know, it's important to me that they know, that I have a record of real results. I have no intention of being a spoiler. There are times I pump the brakes on some stuff because I can read the public. But I have a record of real results. So I want people to know that it's not only leading by listening. It's when I do that and when it gets public, the board winds up coming on board. And they've supported me unanimously on a number of other initiatives that I've listed in the ad. The first one was that when Wayne Scott had the contaminated wells, everybody knew you had to solve the problem with public water. But it took about a year and a half to bring the public water mains in. And while they were waiting, they were using this contaminated water. And I was urging the town board to declare an emergency and set up a fund so that they would have in-home filtration while they were waiting. And that became somewhat contentious. But you know what? It was a good idea. And once it was exposed in public and they saw the support for it, it won unanimous support. So my point is, when you lead by listening, you get results.
Now, how did that particular issue, how did that come to be on your desk in the first place?
I was the liaison to Wayne Scott
Okay.
when the crisis hit. And, I would be reporting on all the efforts we were making to bring in public water. And I had people calling me up saying, Jeff, I have grandchildren visiting me. They're bathing in the water. We're cooking in the water. I don't think it's safe. Some said, I have dogs. I don't want to give it to my dogs. You got to do something. And it was difficult to know what to do because they were emerging contaminants. So it took me maybe 2-3 months to do the research to figure out what kind of systems would remove these PFOs. But I did. I figured it out finally. And as I said, the first reaction was, pushback from the board and a bit of, controversy. But ultimately, they did it, and they did it unanimously.
Well, it's funny. You told a couple of stories here, a couple of examples, if you will, and but the common denominator in all those is not only listening, right, but it's also people talking, because you can listen all you want, but unless people's talking, you're not going to hear anything, right?
That's it.
Right.
There's a difference between listening and hearing. You
Yes.
got to hear them.
Right.
It's important to hear them.
Right, but it also shows why it's so important. Like, you see so much so much bad information, regardless of what side of the aisle you sit on or so much bad information on social media. We all know that, right? But the information is there for people to draw a good opinion on if they too are listening and not only you.
Yes.
So we have, I'm reading things on social media, and you will see people saying stuff, even in the meetings that who've been standing in front of you, you're like, where have you been? We've been talking about this for 2 years,
Yes.
right?
That does happen.
You don't say that, but you, so I just encourage everybody to for me, working now at LTV, just and being hands-on and listening to the board meetings and having it on in the office and everything, I've learned so much. I just wish people would really tune in and really hear it coming from the horse's mouth.
Hear the facts. I agree. And I have to put in a plug for LTV to remind everybody how important LTV is to governing the town. It's really, it's an absolutely essential element, because you do give people, the opportunity to participate live, but also go back and see the meetings and really figure things out. And
we don't have an agenda either. I mean, just to let everybody know that we're not Democrat, we're not Republican. We ride the line.
You're a neutral carrier. But it's very helpful to hear the public, and in that mix, that market of ideas, that free market of ideas that happens on the board is still very helpful, because it helps you sort through what's valid, what isn't valid. You can make you can make course corrections, you can correct people, you can inform them, and you can be informed by them. Right. And I say to everybody that will hear me that I don't care if you're a Democrat, Republican, Independent, what you are. Anybody with a good idea I'm open to anybody with a good idea. I don't care where it comes from. My interest is in governing the town. And, I just want to see, another episode that happened, another issue that evolved in this way was Amagansett had the dust storms. I don't know if you remember those.
It's when I had the music store and it was coming in my windows.
And it was terrible. I mean, we had really businesses closed, the library was damaged, HVAC systems were damaged. Yep. Kids couldn't take school recess because air quality was so bad. And, I got some pushback from my opponents saying, well, there's nothing you can do. It's global warming. It was a farmer who planted a cover crop to keep the soil on, and the birds ate it or the rains came. And so there was contention. But again, I worked through the issue. I worked with the farming community because I was on the agriculture committee, and I worked with the neighbors who were very helpful in providing information about ways to do it. And we had to work on the timing of it so the farmers weren't worried that their city neighbors would complain if they were plowing, in the spring when they needed to plow. Right. But you know what? We got it done. And so again, what I'm saying is, and I want people to understand that this, lead by listening, it's not just a slogan. It's a mechanism to get things done. And I have a real record of results. And I freely say I didn't do all the homework. A lot of the times it's the public that helps me with the homework. But they help you get a result. And that's another instance when the town board started out maybe not so supportive, but wound up, supporting it, 100% unanimously.
And what do you think, though, Jeff, in moving forward, for this town, what do you think is the biggest issue? The biggest, not specific issue, but the biggest overriding issue that you would like to address, that you think you would focus on?
It's interesting to ask that, because they're sort of standard issues that we're all worried about. We're worried about water quality. We're worried about sea level rise. We're extremely worried about renewable energy. We're worried about affordable housing. But, just by the way you ask that, I think that there is, an overriding sense of loss in the community. I talk to a lot of people who are worried that we're losing our community. And I've thought about it a lot, and I like to say, we can't let the houses and the parties get bigger and bigger while the local community gets smaller and smaller.
Okay.
And so some of these issues that we talked about nationally, like wealth inequality, are really at work here. And we have to, I think, get a grip on it. I think it leads into some touchy issues that will probably create, difficult town board meetings. I think houses are too big. I think we have to be more controlled on house size, because what we're seeing, and we've seen it in Amagansett in the lanes, is that, what used to be, I used to live on the lane, so I know what it used to look like. It was like a little Leave It to Beaver house, like a beautiful, the houses tended to be sort of modest size, open lawns, and real neighborhood feeling. And what's gone on is they get torn down, and they're putting in much more glamorous, much larger houses. And when you do that, you up the prices, you drive people out because they sell out. And there are other things that we do that have the same effect. I think when you do that, it affects the stores and who's going to be shopping, and it tends to create an economic culture that's this very high-end culture, and then it accelerates because that drives out people. And we just read this week, yesterday, day before, that World Pie is closing.
Yes, I saw
Folks
that.
know that everybody knows World Pie. I mean, it's a place I go to all the time because they're open late all year round, and if I'm coming out from meetings in Southampton, I always stop at World Pie for a very late dinner. And it sounds like it's going to become another upscale restaurant. So I do think, that and you know what? This is one of the reasons that I was very upset about the Duryea deal that was made by my opponent, because that was another example of, a classic Montauk casual lunch spot, on a paper plate, suddenly turning into like, $18 for a side order of French fries in an upscale yachting restaurant. And I know there are people that go, it's beautiful and I like being there, but you know what? Little by little, that drives our local community away.
Right, and and a lot of ties into affordable housing and all that kind of. We could talk for days on that. We got about a minute left here, Jeff.
Just a minute, okay.
Yeah, it's gone quickly, but that's a good thing. It's good conversation.
It is good. I always have fun, and the time goes very quickly. I wanted to say one other thing about a project that I worked on in Camp Hero. Camp Hero was an affordable housing development. They've had troubles with their wastewater system for forever and ever, and it was just a mess. And finally, again, there was some contention over getting it done, but I finally consulted with a whole bunch of people. We're doing new engineering to get them a new system using water quality funds that are available to do it, so they don't have to pay for it, because they've been paying for this polluting system that's dumping effluent into Hither Hill State Park. And that's another example of just working hard for a group of neighbors that needed help. And it's another result that I'm really proud of. So I really want people to know I have a record of results and that I can still listen to get there.
There you go, listening. Yeah, that's the key for you, isn't
Lead
it?
by listening. And it's not a made-up line. It's something that I really believe in.
Well, thank you, and until next time, thank you for having me as the guest host today.
Thank you for doing it.
Oh, no problem.
It's always a pleasure. I
And
really like
so
seeing
we'll see you next time.
Okay, good.
Thank you, folks.
We'll do more.